A deal on Dickens, who could resist? A stack of Austen, warmly kissed. Golden Age crime tales twist and turn, every page a treasure to learn. Books keep coming home with me, piles so tall they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea, reading always feels so free.
Hi, my name is Talia. Welcome to Talia Nerds Out. I have one more video of my 3-part birthday book haul series that'll hopefully go up today. But I thought I would... Sorry, our printer just made a noise for some reason. Anyway. I'm not sure if that's bleeding over in or not. Anyway, but I thought I would just knock out a book tag video, and if I have time before people start rousing, moving around for their morning, I would hope to maybe get a book review or two in. But I got tagged, and I have the notes here because I'm actually still in the middle of watching the video, but thankfully the person who tagged me in this book tag put the questions in the description so I can still enjoy the rest of her video when I'm done recording, but take advantage of a good time period for recording. Incidentally, you might notice that there's a bit more of a yellowish tint to the video, a warmer tint to the video than my past one. I'm hoping this will be a little bit easier on my eyes because I've been having more migraines lately. I'm not sure if it's been the weather or the fact that up until fairly recently I was having issues getting all the medications I needed, but I just don't feel like having another migraine every time I record. So I'm hoping the warmer lights plus the migraine glasses will be effective in combating that. But of course, with the warmer lights and the amber glasses, I chose to write the questions down in reddish pinkish ink. So, brilliant idea on my part. If I have to squint at the paper occasionally, you know it's because I made a genius ink choice. So, this is the Audible tag. Apparently, it was created by BookBubs. And I was tagged by Sue Jackson. But I first heard of this book tag actually from another channel, which is a new to me channel. This channel is CG Rated Books. And from what I can see, he does a lot of book tag videos. I've enjoyed the videos of his that I have thus far watched. But I am very new to his channel. Go ahead and check him out, as well as checking out Sue Jackson and the BookBubs. So the first prompt in this book tag is, do you listen to audiobooks? If not, why? I do listen to audiobooks, not a whole lot. And the reason for that is that I don't absorb the information as well when I'm listening to it versus when I'm reading it. I feel that, especially if there are a lot of names, I won't necessarily register them as well, especially if I'm only paying half attention, particularly for historical things. And the other thing that I've noted is that, well, I personally don't want to have my first experience for a fictional work to be audiobook, because I want to hear that character's voice for the first time in the actual experiencing of the book in its original format. Now, I say original format, that could also mean Kindle book. In a format where I'm reading it physically versus listening to it. And the reason is, I don't know if you experience this when you're reading, but when I read, I don't necessarily hear the character's voice in my head, but I have a feeling for how they should sound. I get a feeling of them. But if I listen to an audiobook first, I'm not getting my own feeling of who the character is. I feel that I am getting the narrator's interpretation of who the character is by the way they choose to put inflection on the words. I don't want that to be my first experience with a fictional work. And this is the way I feel as well when I will go into a movie for the first time. I don't always have a great idea of what the character will look like or how they'll sound, but I can tell you when I see that adaptation in the movie, like if it wasn't gotten right, or if it was gotten right. Not because I had a very clear picture beforehand necessarily, but because I had a feeling for them because of the way I experience books. So I don't necessarily like to have, for fiction particularly, that extra barrier of someone else's voice being my experience, especially my first experience of that book. Do you listen? I did that one already. Okay, number 2. Has your use of audiobooks changed over time? If so, how? Yes, my use of audiobooks has changed over time. I used to listen to them a lot more. But as I started going for, how do I say this? As I found that some of the history books I wanted to explore, or even some nonfiction books I wanted to explore, had more going on. They were more dense. I began to find that the audiobook was not the best format for me because I kept having to skip back and see what I missed. So I would find that it would take that much longer to read something because I would need to listen to a part over and over again. So it's, I would say, perhaps not only a registering of, oh, I think I prefer a different format, but also because of the shift in my reading choices, that also has affected my choice of reading format. Number 3, how do you choose which book will be read versus listened to? Well, first of all, if it's fiction, most likely it will be read. Well, how I'll choose whether or not it will be listened to? First of all, it depends on how I can best get the book. If the book is too expensive in any other form but audiobook, and I can get the audiobook on Libby, that decides if I will be listening to that book, if I really must read that book now. Another thing that will determine whether or not I go audiobook is, I had this happen actually twice recently, and I never experienced these particular books fully audiobook. I always did the audiobook sort of as a supplement to the books I was reading physically. One book has been the Path Between the Seas by David McCullough, and I keep vacillating about whether or not I'll finish it. I think I'm going to end up DNFing it, but we'll see. But I have started listening to the audiobook because I have been so frustrated with how much I've not really been enjoying the physical book. And for a while that seemed to have helped, but now I'm running into the same old problems where the names start kind of blending together and I see that I am missing things. So it helped for a time. I was hoping it would be what would get me over that hump to be able to finish that book. Now, I did use an audiobook fairly recently to get me over the hump of the infamous Waterloo section in Les Mis. That section was taking forever, and that's the unabridged Les Mis. And I was like, you know what? let me just muscle my way through the last part of this section by listening to audiobook. Well, the other thing that helped me realize was that not all French translations from French to English of Les Mis are created equal. The audiobook version was very much not up to the standard of my unabridged physical translation of Les Mis, but the unabridged one I got from from Hoopla was free, so I went with the translation that I had for that for audiobook. But there were some really odd choices of words, and I noticed it throughout the Waterloo section, and like I said, it did a really good job of getting me through the Waterloo section. It served its purpose for me. But I then switched back to my physical book entirely because I ran into a section, because I let it bleed over. I was doing something else. I let it bleed over into the next section past Waterloo. And you're meeting Cosette again. This is before she meets Valjean. And they have in my physical form, it says something to the effect of, oh gosh, I wish I could remember. Hi, I'm back. So it was well worth me going and looking it up on my Instagram because it was a little while ago that I noticed the weird translation. So, okay, the audiobook translation said something to the effect of, for a quarter of an hour, her anxiety leapt into her bosom like, for nearly a quarter of an hour, her heart leapt into her bosom like a big snowflake. That's the audio book translation. The physical, my unabridged physical book, the translation for that makes a lot more sense. It says something effective. For nearly a quarter of an hour, her heart leapt into her bosom, or leapt into her throat. That was what their translation was. For nearly a quarter of an hour, her heart leapt into her throat like a round bouncing ball or something to that effect. So it really changed the meaning from the audiobook to the physical book. The audiobook, I mean, first of all, it felt really odd, like she's like 8 or 10, you're talking about a snowflake jumping in her bosom. And whereas the translation I had originally been reading in made a lot more sense. Okay, yes, her heart leapt into her throat like a bouncing ball. Okay, that makes sense. So I, needless to say, switched back from the audiobook to the physical book. Although I probably would have anyway, because that is my preferred method of reading fiction. But it did its job of getting me through a hard section that I was struggling with because it was so divorced from the rest of the plot. Okay, then next for let's see, I think that was 3 that I just finished. 4, do you look into narrators before you listen, or do you go in blind? I try to listen to a sample, because if I can't stand the narrator, I'm not going to make it very far. And I have very few narrators that I know off the top of my head where I'm like, oh, okay, well, if I do this kind of book, I'm going to have that narrator. The only one I would know by name is Hugh Fraser. He did a really good he does really good narration of Agatha Christie's books, her Hercule Poirot books in particular. And on the rare occasions I listen to a Christie book versus read it either on Kindle or physical form, I will almost exclusively listen to a Hugh Fraser narration. And Hugh Fraser is the person who played Captain Hastings in the TV show with, why am I blanking on his name? Oh, darn, that's embarrassing. I can even see him in my head. Oh, darn. I'll remember. Suchet. So Hugh Fraser plays Hastings to David Suchet's Poirot. I kept getting Derek Jacobi in my head instead when I kept wanting to say Suchet, which is like, no, that's Brother Cadfael. Although I have listened to him narrate before, and he does do a good job, I believe. When I was listening to some of the Narnia books, I want to say he did either Dawn Treader. He didn't do Prince Caspian. That was a lady translator. She did a good job, though. I want to say he did Dawn Treader. He did one of the other books, and I remember he did a good job. Anything else for narrators? I do tend to, if I'm listening to like a Sherlock Holmes, I want a man narrating it, and I want it to be a British man. I want to be able to imagine this is Watson actually doing the narrating. Same thing for when I am listening to something like, if I choose to listen versus read a Jane Austen or something like Little Women, Anne of Green Gables, anything in that kind of area, I will only want a woman narrating, because otherwise it would just feel weird. Not that I think you really would find men who would narrate that. I might be surprised, but I would only want a woman narrating that. Let's see. I was actually really surprised how much I enjoyed the woman who narrated, I want to say it was Prince Caspian, because previously I'd only ever listened to men narrate C.S. Lewis's Narnia series, and I was not sure how I'd feel about that being switched up, but she was actually quite good, as I recall. And I was already, that's one of the main things for me for fiction. If I'm going to listen to it, I have to be very familiar with the work already, where it actually gives me another perspective on the work versus that being my first perspective on the work. Okay. 5, do you multitask while audiobooking? If so, what else do you do? Well, that's like the main reason I would listen to an audiobook, besides, trying to make it through a section like I've explained before. I do just about anything. If I'm not listening to / watching YouTube videos, booktubers, etc., I am going to be listening to audiobooks while I either do things around the house or do some scrapbooking, or for my book journal. I used to do while I was knitting. I don't knit quite as much as I used to, simply because light is an issue for me. Having a decent amount of light, and also that requires a certain level of focus I don't always have anymore. So when I'm doing those things, also sometimes if I'm doing stuff on the computer that I can spare just enough attention to listen to an audiobook, but I need part of the attention elsewhere. Also, where else? I think that's mostly the things that'll, basically anything that I can do while I'm listening to something on YouTube. If I happen to have an audiobook I'm listening to, I'll do that then. So yeah, that's the ultimate reason for an audiobook. In the end, it's to be able to multitask, at least for me. If you are reading a series and you have listened to the first book, would you switch to reading a later book, or do they all need to be listened to now? I honestly can't answer that because, really answer that because anytime I've listened to a series, it's been books that I've already read and am highly familiar with, so it wouldn't matter which medium I'm in. I could easily switch back and forth. And other than that, I tend to do, on the rare occasions that I'll really listen to audiobooks anymore, in full, I will read history books. And a lot of times they are single volumes, so a series really isn't something that makes much of a difference for me who the narrator is. I just want someone who is pleasant to listen to and easy to, who really makes the stuff sink in. Oh, that was what I wanted to add for the previous question. Besides, one of the other things I do for multitasking is if I'm having light sensitivity, but not to a full migraine level where, or to a point where all my senses are being bothered, either because I'm having migraine or I'm just having a full sensory overload. If I'm not at that point, if I just have some light sensitivity or a more mild migraine, sometimes I'll listen to an audiobook so I can still get some reading in. Now, unfortunately, I don't usually stay in that happy area where I can't handle the light but want to listen to an audiobook, because usually fairly quickly after, I'll either not want to focus that much, or sound will actually, it'll be too much. I'll go into overload, or I'll have a full on migraine where I just don't want anything. I just want to go to sleep and let my medicine kick in. So, but when I'm still in that kind of in-between area of I can't handle light, but my sound is not yet torture, that's usually where I'll try to slide in an audiobook, because I can then turn the phone upside down. It doesn't matter what's on the screen. I don't need to see anything. I can just listen. Okay. Now going back, I already did 6, 7. What % of the books you're consuming currently are audiobooks? I'm going to call it 0.1%, only because I'm kind of sort of trying to work through Path Between the Seas by audiobook, but I am mostly reading that physical, or if I even finish it, that I'm mostly reading it physical. It's not quite doing the job I was hoping it would to push me through into getting over the hump to finishing the book. But that's the closest I am currently at for reading a book via audiobook at this point. A majority of what I'm reading is physical, with a few digital books that I think I've maybe read 2 or 3 digital books this year, maybe. Let's see. And bonus, do you have a favorite narrator or favorite book that you enjoyed in the audiobook format? And I am going to again point to Hugh Fraser. He is probably the only narrator that I can say that I have returned to time and time again. For the few times that I choose to listen to a Poirot versus experience it by reading it. So, yeah, he's the only one that I will go, oh, that's a Poirot book. Oh, it's not by Hugh Fraser. Well, I'm not reading that. Not listening to that. I'll, wait till it comes out, or the Hugh Fraser version becomes less expensive, or until I can borrow it elsewhere, because it's just not going to be as good if he's not the one narrating it. And across the board, when we had a bunch of Christie fans in a chat at one point, and we were talking about narrators we recommend for Agatha Christie's work, almost across the board, everyone said that Hugh Fraser was the top narrator for Agatha Christie books. I've listened to Shay do it. He's not bad. And I've also listened to, I want to say 1 or 2 of the actor who plays Inspector Jap in the Suchet TV series. He also will occasionally narrate, but usually even if I had to choose between Suchet and Hugh Fraser, I'll go with Hugh Fraser. But yeah, that's the only narrator I can think of off the top of my head that I consistently will pick. So that is it for this Audible book tag. This went a little longer than I intended just because I got a little rambly. Thank you very much to Sue Jackson for tagging me. Consider yourself tagged if you watch this video and you decide that this is something that you are interested in doing yourself. I will try to remember to tag people below. And I will also be planning to tag, besides Sue Jackson, also BookBubs, who created this tag, and CG Rated Books, by whom I first became aware of this tag. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope that you have a wonderful day, and I will see you again next time. God bless. Bye.
Books keep coming home with me. Piles so tall, they're all I see. Turn a page and sail the sea. Reading always feels so free.